Hello, everyone. Welcome to our live chat. So, we are continuing our virtual coffee series today. And if you don't know me, I'm the founder of startup called Cubitro. And today, our guest is Steven Goldberg from HarperDB. And as usual, I will just ask a few questions from founder to founder, startup to startup, and normally we would be doing probably in person, but because of the current challenges, we decided to continuing our chats. And so the second show is going with Steven, and welcome, Steven.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Sure. How are you? How things are going?
Things are going well. It's pretty warm in Denver, unusually warm, and having an exciting sort of end of a year and trying to keep my head above water.
Right. End of the year is hard for
Yeah,
everyone at any stage, right?
yeah,
So, yeah, what I would ask is at first, I would like to learn more about your personal background very briefly, and then we can keep going for the HarperDB part.
sure. I'll do my best to keep it brief. So I got interested in computers and programming when I was 13. My uncle ran a startup in the Bay Area in the early 90s that did billing for the early internet companies. And so I went and I interned for him when I was young. And that kind of just brought me on this journey. And along the way, I worked at a number of different companies like Red Hat. And then I founded a couple of companies before this where I picked up a lot of our core team. Kyle Bernhardy, who's our CTO, was my first employee at my first company. And Zach Fowler, who's our also a co-founder, was the second employee. And Fred Yoon, who's our COO, was one of our customers. And so we've kind of, and Jason Basonic, who's our head of sales, was involved as well. And so we've kind of been building this core team for a long time, and then here we are at HarperDB.
Cool. That's great brief. So, have you ever involved in technical projects, or were you more involved in the business part in your background?
Yeah, so I've been on, I've sort of worn a number of different hats.
Right.
I've, you know, done a lot of development, program management, project management. I was a business analyst. I've been a CTO. At the last company, I was the chief technology officer. So I would say I'm lean towards the technical side to a certain degree, but I also like have done a lot of pre-sales work that was very helpful. And so, consulting and pre-sales helped me a lot to sort of be an effective CEO because while I do lean towards the technical side, obviously sales and the operations are a very important part of running a startup. And so I got a lot of good experience doing that through the consulting work I did at couple different companies.
Cool. That makes perfect sense because you had different experiences and you can now combine them while you are building something from scratch, just like many other founders. So it makes perfect sense. And and speaking of the HarperDB, and I can easily guess that there is a reason because you wanted to do something from scratch. But we would like to hear from you. What was the few core reasons that you wanted to build uh, one of the hardest, and challenging solutions, which is databases? We would like to learn more about that part as an
Sure.
audience. Yeah.
The simple answer is because I'm an idiot. Is the real answer, and I had no idea what I was getting into, and I wouldn't do it again.
Yeah.
But the longer answer is so Kyle, who's my CTO, and myself, he was the VP of engineering in our last company, and Fred Yoon, who was our COO, was the COO of our last company. Um, Kyle and I started working on a product 3 companies ago that we were building, which was a middleware technology, it was sort of an integration system. and it was focused on trying to dynamically integrate systems like ERP systems, CRM systems, things of that nature. This was before like APIs were as simple as they are today. This was back in the day of SOAP and XML, and when integration was complicated. And it's still complicated, obviously, but we tried to build a middleware tool and kind of began to learn that, like, regardless of how smart we made the middleware tool, databases really made integration challenging because of their rigid nature, because of when they weren't rigid, they lacked performance and, understanding of schema. And so we were starting to get frustrated about that in like 2010, 2011. But then we went and worked at a different company that was a big data and analytics company, and we were doing streaming analytics for social media, for the Twitter fire hosting, Facebook fire host, for live events like the World Cup, the Super Bowl, Beyonce concerts. And so we were monitoring all social media in real time around those events. And we'd be streaming millions and millions of social media profiles and tweets and things. And to manage that, we had this massive infrastructure of databases. We had our DBMS systems, NoSQL databases. We started to explore things like data lakes. We had to build our own custom middleware. It got very complicated. And we were a small company, and we were spending almost all of our engineering budget and really half the company's budget on our data infrastructure, to the point where we bought a Cray supercomputer and put it in an Equinix data center. And the reason that we did that was because it was cheaper than running our data infrastructure on AWS, which is crazy to think about. And we still couldn't get the performance we wanted, and we still had most of our engineers managing our database. Whereas if you look at when I started coding when I was young, you had MySQL, Postgres, or Oracle. That was it. Like, there was no other databases. And they just worked for those use cases. And so what Kyle and I wanted to do was, we really wanted to build a product where it was a workhorse that could kind of do everything. And our goal wasn't to make it like an in-memory database that was the fastest read database in the world, or the fastest write database in the world, or a graph database. What we wanted was a database where you could kind of accomplish almost everything in one product. And if you needed a specialized thing, you could put it over here. But that was this more modern workhorse in the way that Postgres and MySQL had been 10 years ago. And so that's what we set out to build, something that could handle the scale of a NoSQL database with writes and the flexibility, but with the analytical capability of an RDBMS like an Oracle or Postgres or MySQL or a VoltDB. And so that's what we started to build. And we came up with a lot of ideas at first, and they were mishmashes of sort of multi-model and different concepts. And none of those would really give us anything unique, and we'd just be repackaging existing technology. And we realized to achieve kind of what we wanted, we'd have to build something new from the ground up. And we tried a couple crazy ideas that, we built the original version of HarperDB on the file system directly, which was an insane idea. And it was my idea and not a great one. And later, Kyle realized we should probably rebuild on top of LMDB, which is what we have today. And that's why we have the great performance we do. So we owe a lot to LMDB and Howard Chu because of that. But we kind of realized that we had to sort of build something from the ground up to achieve that. And that's what we did. And that's what we have now. And we're starting to see that people are realizing, hey, I don't need a graph database and a time series database and a NoSQL database and a SQL database and a data lake and Oracle. Maybe I should find like one product that can do most of those things pretty well. And that's what we kind of are. We see ourselves, and that's one of the reasons why we like having a dog as a logo, because we're not a cheetah. We are, but we're not a delicate animal either. It's a sturdy, loyal, solid, stable, sort of trustworthy animal. And that's why we kind of named it after my dog, Harper. So it's a lot of rambling, but hopefully that answers your question.
Right. And I I can guess that all these stories are long, so it's
Yeah,
great to hear
yeah,
for me actually. And I'm very surprised, but I clearly understand the reason you built and what you are targeting, which is also important.
yeah,
It's great to hear that you are not just fastest database to read data or write data or just for time series data, for
yeah,
example. We are, as a user, we are also try different solutions such as NoSQL, Mongo,
mm,
Redis as a cache, and timescale DB. We even didn't try SQL, so we knew it wasn't going to work.
yeah.
So it's also interesting topic, personal to me. And so thank you for the long but very helpful answer. And um, I wonder personally, how was your first year? As far as you remember, because those are the most important
Yeah.
and interesting part in our life. So
It was pretty scary.
yeah,
The first couple of years, I mean, were pretty scary, but we left the company, five of us, and started HarperDB. We had enough money, I think, for a month or two to pay our salaries. And in that month or two, Kyle, Zach, and I were building the product while not knowing if it was going to work. While also I was trying to raise money to make sure that we had salaries, for the remaining months. So we left the company with 2 months of burn rate, while not having ever written a line of code on the product because we didn't want to be like accused of like property theft or anything. And so we didn't start the first line of code until March 1st, 2017. And we had money for 2 months. And we started coding like madmen while I was also trying to raise money like a crazy person. And I remember when we got like read, insert, uh, like just the basic NoSQL functions like CRUD, create, read, update, delete working. And we were like astoundedly happy. Looking back on that product, was extremely simplistic and barely worked. But we proved to ourselves at least that we could do it. And I was able to raise some more money. And but it was very scary. And we kind of lived in this constant state of raise money,
right,
raise money, prove, and we're
right,
just getting out of that now, which is awesome. But it was a long, almost 5 years.
yeah. We can easily say that
Yeah,
it was all about proving something, right,
yeah,
at the beginning, to investors, to potential customers, or to even your team. It's all
yeah,
about proving something, and it's also great to hear that because it's hard to being understandable from the other people who are not involved in the startup life. They probably having hard time to imagine why these things take some time. And it's also glad to hear another example from you. Maybe the reason is product market fit, maybe something else, maybe just timing. uh, yeah, we
all,
cannot know. Yeah,
yeah,
all of them
yeah,
probably. And I think what you told me is a clear example of you need to have a vision and you need to know what you want at the end, not at the beginning. So it's glad to hear that part as well.
yeah.
So going back to the these days, um, how things are going at HarperDB. I mean, more about the product, your not need to mention the names, but customer base, the use cases. I also wonder because, as I mentioned earlier, we are using two databases right now,
Yeah.
and the greatest obstacle is multi-regional data distribution. For people who are not technical, at Qubitro, we store data from devices, and we want to store them in different countries, in Europe, in US, and different regions. So this is pretty hard. Whether you are using any already built-in solution or trying to do something manually, it's hard. It's still hard. So I think that would be a great addition to learn more about HarperDB these days. What you are doing, what's your plans, so that kind of stuff.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. So we kind of have two different use cases. I'll talk to one of them first, which is your use case. So HarperDB uses a peer-to-peer architecture, and for non-technical folks, what that means is like every instance of HarperDB is sort of the main server and has all the intelligence and can communicate with itself. And so because we use a peer-to-peer framework, because it's sort of cloud agnostic, it's hardware agnostic, it just uses a Unix operating system to run, and it has a globally shared schema, we've found a lot of success in sort of geo-distributed, multi-regional use cases and lowering latency. And so those are really important in IoT, as you've said, and we're starting to see some really interesting traction there with partnerships with like companies like Verizon and Akamai, and working on different IoT use cases that we've done with the U.S. military, for U.S. Army, U.S. Air Force, things of that nature. And also we've done some work in the public utility space around IoT, and HarperDB is just a really solid fit for those use cases because you can deploy HarperDB anywhere. It kind of brings most of the things you want from the cloud to the edge. So you get serverless functions in HarperDB's custom functions. You get NoSQL, SQL. You can even do things like build your own graph capability in HarperDB. You can do AI, machine learning, but you also can very easily, through a beautiful user interface, set up globally distributed clusters that you configure how you want them to work. And so it solves a lot of those global distributed issues. And it also does a really good job for lowering latency in those areas. And so we've seen a lot, like I said, in gaming is a lot of traction there because that becomes important, as well as IoT and military public utility. The other use case that we've seen more recently gain a lot of steam, which is honestly why we built HarperDB, is a lot of folks are just tired of having many different databases. They're tired of spending millions and millions of dollars on huge enterprise systems and then having to buy Mongo and other things as well. And so because HarperDB is kind of the workhorse, and because you can build your application stack in HarperDB with our custom functions, it's made it really easy to migrate off of legacy systems where a lot of that application code lives in the database. Maybe you wrote it in PL SQL for Oracle, or triggers and stored procedures in MySQL or SQL Server. You can migrate those very easily to HarperDB custom functions. And so we've started to see a lot of traction in that area, as well as customers replacing HarperDB with their replacing their enterprise systems with HarperDB in that area.
Yeah, cool. It's good to hear that. And that pops me another question. As you know, there are some terminologies like cold storage, hot storage, and for example, what we saw is also that kind of terminologies, because we don't want our users knowing about all this stuff. Just publish data and work with that.
Yep.
So how HarperDB works at that point? I understood the integration, which is easy, and migration part, and the scalability. And how would you describe that kind of stuff? Do we need to figure out or configure those options depending on the use case? What are the built-in, let's say? What would you promote? Let's say I'm an investor or someone.
No, So one of the really unique features of HarperDB is that HarperDB, the database, is fully decoupled from the storage. To my knowledge, we're the only database that is true. And so what that means is you can take a snapshot of your storage, and you can move it from, let's say, Turkey to Denver and install a new version of HarperDB on top of it. And within a couple minutes, you're up and running on that snapshot. Or you can have it pre-installed and just start HarperDB and it'll run, and you're up and running in a couple milliseconds. So what that means is you have a lot of really interesting capabilities with storage. So for example, if you want to run on something like NetApp, you can just install HarperDB on NetApp in AWS or just Azure or buy an appliance, and you could do hot and cold storage right there. And HarperDB natively runs on those storage mechanisms. So what's cool about that is that you get hot and cold storage that's automatically handled for you, that you don't have to worry about, and that is extremely performant. And so all you have to do is just install HarperDB. Our team can obviously also help with that. But so for DR, hot, cold storage, distribution, resiliency, you get a lot of benefits because of HarperDB's architecture and what you're able to do there.
Okay, yeah, great to hear that. Thank you for all those features and explanation. And more about the company side, what is your vision about scaling HarperDB in the developer community? Not just the enterprise or the sales point, but in the developer community, the ecosystem. What do you think about that? Yeah, or do you do anything specifically for developers? We would like to learn more about that part.
No, absolutely. So we see the developer community as like, so we have a freemium version of HarperDB that'll be free forever. The goal of that really, and we have HarperDB Cloud. You can run for free on HarperDB Cloud. And the reason that we do that is to sort of engage the developer community, because we get our best feedback from the developer community. We get, we love building stuff for developers and seeing them build cool stuff on it. So we love engaging in the developer community, and they turn into being great evangelists for us, who then build cool stuff that large enterprises who pay our bills are interested in. So sort of we engage the developer community. We have events, frequently. We also do a lot of work with developer influencers, which is a great way to get word out there to the developer community. We've worked with a lot of great ones. We've also built a developer ambassador program. So we have developer ambassadors who can work with HarperDB, get swag and other stuff like that. And we have, Slack channel that we frequently engage the developer community on. And so we honestly spend more time, even though we don't get paid at all, working on supporting the developer community than anything else. But we get it back in spades because, they build amazing things and give us great ideas.
Right. And the last thing is super important. Same for us. They provide the best feedback and honest feedback, and we can easily estimate what we need to build next by just looking to most of the feedback. So it's great to hear that. I will also check that part personally. We would like to learn more about your community and what you're doing, which sounds interesting. So one last thing is from me. You are in a competitive space, which is obvious. There are, not too much, but eight companies, Mongo and others, they're in the field for a long time of period. So as a CEO, what would you recommend to someone by replacing you, let's say, in just imaginary scenario? What would you recommend to be in the game and stay, competitive? It could be for financial advice, it could be community, or maybe product-driven development, anything that you experience.
Yeah, I guess it'd be a couple different things, but one, I used to worry about competition quite a bit, and then I read this interesting article that talked about how, if you think about it, any products that are in the same space, ultimately, if time is infinite, are going to build the exact same product. They may optimize when they build those features differently, and they may optimize, the features, how they deliver them differently. But ultimately, the core features, every product, if time is infinite, will build the same product. And so once I started realizing that and thinking about that, I stopped worrying about competition, and I started focusing on, well, what does make us unique then? And so what makes us unique is three things, in my opinion. Is like we have a great brand, and our brand is great because our core values are important to us. We're extremely transparent. We do empower our end users and our employees, and we really want to engage the community in an empathetic way. And so we deliver really great customer experience and developer support. And so that having a really awesome developer experience, that is what we can do to stay unique, is one thing. The other thing I would say is something you mentioned. I've worked at several startups, and I founded a couple of them. And, they didn't have clear vision. The last one I worked at had really lacked clear vision. That company's pivoted like 7 or 8 times. And there was no vision for what the company really was. And so when we started this, Kyle, my CTO, said to me, we need to have a clear vision of what it is that we want to achieve. And that has really been the most important thing about our success is the vision. The night that we came up with the company has remained the same from that night to today. And we have always been aiming towards that. The path we've taken has changed, but understanding what your vision is and why you want to do this is critically important, because if you're just doing it because you want to start a startup, or you just want to be a CEO, or you don't want to work for someone else, or you want to get rich, like the company, it's going to be very hard to be successful. But if you know exactly what it is that you want to achieve and you stick to it, in my opinion, that's the most important thing to be successful.
Yeah, that's very important, and it's one of the biggest problem, I guess, at least for the early stage founders, to understand that part. At least in my experience. So it's very important, and it took quite some time for me to understand, for example, because I was building from scratch for the first time. But once you do that, and once you understand that part, there's no going back, at least in my experience.
Right.
So you can survive, you can build right features, and you will not be worrying about the competition or nothing else. And I think we can easily say that investment also shouldn't be the first goal, right? Because it's one of the biggest mistakes that I see in startup space. They just build something for feedbacks from investors or potential investors, or building everything from feedback is also not correct. What would you think about that?
I totally agree. I mean, sometimes the community is wrong. I like to say about HarperDB, we're not a democracy. We're a benevolent dictatorship. And what I mean by that is, like, we love hearing feedback from our end users, our customers, the venture community. But ultimately, like, we're going to build what we think is right. And if we didn't trust ourselves that we know what the world needs, we shouldn't be doing this. And so I totally agree with you. Like, if you're just chasing early feedback, especially early stage, you're going to just run in circles. And I've failed at that. I listened to a bunch of people who I shouldn't have listened to. And that's some of my greatest regrets, is actually taking advice. Was some of the worst decisions I made, was instead of listening to myself, listening to other people who were maybe a bit older, who maybe I thought had more experience. And most of the time, those folks were wrong. We have gotten helpful advice along the way. I'm not going to say that no one hasn't helped us. Like, there've definitely been helpful people. And advice I didn't listen to, I regret as well. So knowing what advice to take is extremely important.
Right. Those are very important feedbacks and experience. Thank you for sharing all those today with me and with the audience. And as I mentioned, as a founder of startup, it's very hard to listen and learn these experiences. So thank you for your time today. And actually, I'm looking forward to meet in person, hopefully soon, maybe in the technical events or anywhere else in near future. So thank you for your time and being our guest today.
Awesome.
I'm looking forward to see you again.
You as well. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me. Have a great day.
You as well. Bye.
Bye.